Hey Defenders, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you guys how we can install Cortex. And Cortex is a tool that we like to use to help automate our threat intelligence and response workflows. So as a SOC analyst, rather than dragging and dropping IPs over into VirusTotal, into Abuse IPDB, or even looking up hash values within MISP, or any other third-party threat intel feed that I'm looking to enrich my indicators of compromise with to see if there's no malicious activity associated with my IOC that I received as part of my alert. So because this is a very manual process, it takes time as a SOC analyst to copy and paste these over. It's not efficient, and it's not something that people want to spend a majority of their time doing. And so what Cortex allows us to do is call out to all these various threat feeds like VirusTotal, Abuse, MISP, and supports a ton of others as well, all within just one click. And we can also automate that process, which we'll look into in future videos as well. But Cortex essentially allows us to run all of these analyzers here at scale. So rather than having to jump to each of these platforms individually and looking up an RIP address, for example, I can now have Cortex call all of these in one run, and we'll get our reports from each of those. So it allows us to analyze IOCs that are collected as part of our logs. Maybe I'm receiving WAF logs, for example, and I want to scan those IPs that are connecting to my web application. One example is we can have Cortex doing that for us automatically. And then if Cortex receives a positive hit from one of these threat feeds who we're analyzing with at scale, then we'll receive a corresponding alert. And Cortex makes it super easy to write your own analyzers and responders. And it makes it super flexible because essentially if you can dream it, you can pretty much do it. And it's very similar to like Iris's modules, for example, right? But why you may want to use both, and we will get into this in a later video where we integrate Iris and Cortex together, is Cortex already has a lot of these analyzers built in, while Iris by default currently only has like 2 or 3 at the moment. So what we can do is, because Cortex also has a very robust API, is that we can take advantage of just writing one module within Iris that connects to Cortex and tells Cortex to run the analyzer of our choice and get the response back and populate that response within Iris, which we'll cover in the next video. But technically, if people in the comments are like, why aren't you just doing these with Iris? You 100% can. Cortex has a lot of these already developed. Cortex has been around a lot longer than Iris has. And because of Cortex's API, we can still integrate, we can still take advantage of Iris as our case management solution rather than the Hive, and take advantage of Cortex, which is going to still stay open source, at least for the time being. Hopefully that's the case for the rest of the future. But it allows us to take advantage now of multiple analyzers all at once rather than having to develop Iris modules for that. So hopefully that'll be a little more obvious in the next video. But to do so, we actually need to first install Cortex. So I have written a Medium article. Real quickly, what this is doing under the hood, like the Python modules that are running these analyzers and responders, are really just interacting with these services APIs. You could think of like an analyzer is where we're going to retrieve data from a different source. So this is where I'm looking up IP addresses, hash values, domains, etc. Where responders are, we're telling something to do an action. So maybe a responder could be like invoking, if I have an OpenSense firewall. OpenSense firewalls have an API that we can interact with. So we could say, if we detect within our EDR logs a brute force SSH scan from an IP address, we could have a responder that calls our OpenSense API to dynamically add this IP address to the blacklist and drop this traffic so that their scanning cannot even make it to our endpoint because the firewall is dropping it. And that's just a very basic example. You can get super complex with it and pretty cool. Of course, with any automated actions, especially when you're doing stuff, when you're making tweaks on the firewall, you of course do want to be very careful about that, because you do have the ability for your automation to potentially run wild when that was unintended. So let's actually go ahead and install Cortex. So there are a few prereqs. Cortex is going to require Elastic 7.x. And since our Wazoo indexer is a fork of Elasticsearch 7.10.2, this will work fine. So I can connect Cortex to the current existing Wazoo indexer that we deployed in previous videos. And I like to deploy it with the current Wazoo indexer that I have ingesting seam logs, just because I don't have to worry about maintaining another Elasticsearch or Wazoo indexer cluster. But you can as well deploy if you want to keep these separated. So Cortex is going to store its runs and the data that it gets back from interacting with these various APIs to enrich our data. It's going to store that into an Elasticsearch index. And if you do want to keep that data separated from your like Wazoo logs, for example, then rather than deploying another VM and deploying a Wazoo indexer on a single node, I would recommend just deploying Elastic via Docker. And I do have the steps here to do so. This is, of course, without HTTPS, which I would not recommend in a production environment. So while I do have these steps here, I'm going to gloss over them within this video because I'm going to install Cortex, because I'm going to connect Cortex to our previous Wazoo indexer that we have installed. So I'm going to go ahead and jump down to our install Cortex section. And let me actually verify that I can connect to my Wazoo indexer from this box. Okay, cool. That looks good. Go ahead and clear that out. All right, cool. So let's first install Java. I think Java 8 is okay as well. I'm just going to go ahead and install 11. That is a requirement. I can't remember off the top of my head if you don't have Java installed, if when we install the Cortex, if it'll bring it in for us. I don't remember. So I'm just going to go ahead and install it anyways. If you get the add apt repository command not found, go ahead and install this software properties common, and let me just throw that in the article that it's there. Right, and I'll go ahead and run an apt-get update, clear, and I'll go ahead and install 11. And once this is finished, and it should be finished here in a sec, we will then be able to actually install Cortex. So go ahead and clear that out, and then I will copy the commands that I have listed here. So you're going to reach out and grab the Hives repository. It also has the Cortex package within there. So we've updated all that, and I'll go ahead and now install Cortex. And I think the latest version is like 3.1.7 it looks like is the latest version. And yeah, and here you can see they are recommending Elasticsearch for us. So again, we do need to have Elastic already installed, but in our case, we're going to use the Wazoo indexer since that is a fork of a 7.x branch of Elasticsearch. And all right, I'll go ahead and clear that out. And now, so we have Cortex installed. Now we actually need to configure it. So, but before we do that, our Wazoo indexer is, we did configure our Wazoo indexer for HTTPS. So we will need to copy our in Cortex in order to connect to our Wazoo indexer. We'll need to trust the CA. We'll need to trust the root CA that signed our Wazoo indexer certificate. So we will need to add that root CA to Cortex's Java key store. So if I jump onto my Wazoo indexer and I go into our etc Wazoo indexer cert, I should have my rootca.pem here. So I'm going to go ahead and send this over to my box that's going to be running Cortex. And I'm just going to go ahead and SCP that over. And I'll throw that in the temp for now. So if I ls temp out, we should have that there. Okay, cool. Now let me go ahead and copy this guy over into etc Cortex. And I will now jump into etc Cortex, and we see our root CA and we see our application.conf. Okay, that looks cool. Now let's actually go ahead and create our Java key store where we're going to hold this. So I'm going to copy this command that we have here. I'll just call it root_ca.jks. That's cool. And then my path is I can remove all that because I'm already in this directory. And I will modify that to be rootca.pim. Password, I'll just say change it. And then I'll say change it again. And it's going to ask us, so it's going to load our certificate, which we should, I think we just used the Wazoo one. Yeah, so we just used the Wazoo one that was generated with that. I think we used that install script, if I remember correctly. So of course, if you have used your own CA for your Wazoo indexer, then your certificate owner and issuer will be different, but we will go ahead and trust this. So we'll go ahead and say yes. And the certificate was now added to the key store. And then we should have our root_ca.jks file that we have here. So that all looks good. So we got our key store created. Now let's go ahead and actually configure Cortex. So we're going to open up our application.conf. And here you'll see the first set of parameters that we'll need to set is how we're actually going to connect to Elasticsearch, or the Wazoo indexer in our case. So what I'm first going to do is, of course, set that to HTTPS. Go ahead and copy that guy, paste our IP here, and we need to scroll down. And there are some kind of advanced settings that you can set. More likely than not, you won't have to mess around with those. That's for if you're really doing Cortex at scale. So maybe a future video. But we will need to now add the username and password that we're going to use to connect to our Wazoo indexer. So I am going to use the admin one. I don't recommend this. I would recommend creating a Cortex user within your Wazoo indexer and using that with more limited permissions. But since I'm lazy, I'm going to go ahead and just use the admin one. And another caveat, and this took up a lot of my time to finally figure this out, is that instead of username, we need to go ahead and remove this and use user. Why that's still in the application.conf, I'm not really sure, because I think it has been reported. Unless maybe I'm doing something wrong myself, I'm not sure. But make sure you do change that from username to user. And then we're going to go ahead and uncomment out our key store, because our key store and trust store, because that's what we just created to tell Cortex to trust our rootca that has signed the Wazoo indexer certificates. So I'm going to go ahead and save that real quick and ls this path out, and we called it this guy. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And our path is going to be etc cortex /rootca. And then the same is going to be the same for the trust store. etc cortex. Boom. And then we're going to implement our password. And the password that I set was just change it. So if that was different, then you would just reflect that here. So change it. And that looks good. And now before we actually start Cortex, let's go ahead and actually install our analyzers and responders. So these analyzers and responders are written in either Python 2 or Python 3. So we're going to actually go ahead and install Python 2 and 3 if you don't have it on your box already. And then we're going to run these various commands here that are going to bring in the analyzers and responders and install them for us. So I need to make sure I don't have Python 2. So I'm going to go ahead and say git install Python 2. And then I should already have Python 3, and I do. So go ahead and copy this command here. That'll grab some build dependencies for us. All right, I'm going to go ahead and cd into op and then run a wget to get pip. I like to use this script to do it rather than like an app install python 2-pip. That'll work too. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to go ahead and do a python 2 get pip, which is actually probably going to fail and say you need another one. Yeah, so I'll do python 3 get pip first, and then I will do the python 2 one here in a sec. So, all right, we got that downloaded. Oh, it should actually give me the link. Please use this guy instead. So I'll go ahead and copy that. I'll remove my git pip. I'll do a wget, grab that guy, Python 2 get pip.py. And cool, bringing that in. All right, go ahead and clear that out. Now let's go ahead and install our setup tools. Let me make sure I can do a pip2. Okay, good. Pip3. Okay, good. All right, so got that installed. Lastly, clear that out. All right, let's now clone the repo where the analyzers and responders currently exist. And now we'll just go ahead and run this command together here. That is going to just loop through every analyzer and responder and install the requirements.txt, which will be the necessary Python libraries that the analyzers and responders need to correctly operate. So go ahead and paste that in here. And this is going to loop through all of the analyzers and responders, which is probably going to take a while. So do be patient with this. It will finish. You'll more than likely probably see some errors for like actually like I'm seeing some here. Honestly, I haven't like investigated what specific analyzers these errors are reporting to or which specific libraries. So I haven't had a problem with any of the analyzers that I use out of the box for Cortex giving me an issue because there hasn't been a necessary Python library installed. So I would just, rather than trying to spend your time troubleshooting and figuring out which exact one it is, I would just go ahead and just get this up and running. And then if you come across an analyzer or responder that you need to troubleshoot a little further, then because a Python library hasn't been brought in, then you can investigate a little further. But hopefully more than likely you won't run into that problem. But this will run for a little bit. Through the power of editing, we'll go ahead and jump ahead. All right, and so we now have our Cortex and analyzers installed. Now let's configure Cortex to actually read and use these analyzers. And to do so, and all we need to do is point to the directory where these analyzers sit. So if I cd into opt Cortex analyzers and then analyzers and then just do an ls, you'll see all of our analyzers listed here. So I will go ahead and open back up our application.conf. Scroll down onto analyzers that we have here. And I'll go ahead and just comment the URL that they have there. And then go ahead and paste our analyzers here. And then we'll also need to do the same for the responders, which will sit within the same opt/Cortex analyzers, but is going to be /responders rather than /analyzers. So go ahead and copy and paste that there, and that all looks good. All right, now let's generate our secret key that Cortex is going to use. So I'll go ahead and copy this command, paste that there. And then if we open up our etc, we should see our HTTP secret key down here. So that looks good. So make sure you do have that added, which if you just copy and paste that command, that will do that for you. And now we are ready to start Cortex. So let's go ahead and hit it with a systemctl start Cortex. And then the log file will be in var log cortex application.log. And we should hopefully see it come up and start accordingly. Okay, so we got an error with Elasticsearch saying that the index has not been found. Okay, that's fine. What we can do is actually create that index. I feel like Cortex used to create it for us automatically, but now you can do it through the web UI, which I'll show you guys here in a sec. So we do see it is listening on port 9001, so that's good. And by default, it is HTTP. So make sure you are using that. And now let's go ahead and now update our database. And what this should do is now create our index within Elasticsearch for us. And it does look like that's what that's done. Looking at the logs, we see that now Cortex has created our Cortex_6 index. If you do still see errors, so if you don't get your pop-up here, do make sure that Cortex is able to connect to your Wazoo indexer, or if you used Elastic to deploy, or if you use Docker to deploy Elastic within a container, do make sure that that connection is there and that it can be established. Otherwise, Cortex will not be able to start up properly if it cannot connect to Elastic. So I'm going to go ahead and create our administrator account. Let's call it admin. I'll just say, please subscribe. Go ahead and create our administrator account. And now if I can now log in with admin and please subscribe. And all right, we are now logged into Cortex. Now let's actually go ahead but before we can configure our analyzer and responders, we first need to actually create an organization. So when you log in as the Cortex admin, you won't have the ability to configure any analyzers or responders. What you'll need to do first is go ahead and create an organization. So I'll just call this Stock Fortress. I'll give a description of Stock Fortress. And if I select this organization to go into it, I'll go ahead and add a user. And I'll go ahead and use my name, and I'll go ahead and set my roles as to read, analyze, and an org admin as well. So I'll go ahead and save this user. I'll go ahead and create a password, go ahead and save that off. And now I can log out of the administrator account and log in with my Stock Fortress email. And now you'll notice when I log in, I have the ability to configure our analyzers, responders. I can do organization, I can do admin related tasks to my organization that I'm a part of, which is our Stock Fortress one. So this is how we will configure our analyzers and responders here. So I'll go ahead and go into analyzers, and let's actually do let's do our MISP one. Let's configure it to MISP. So I first need to generate an API key. So within MISP, I'm going to go into administration. My other monitor shut off, so I really hope I didn't just lose everything I was recording, but it's now on the screen capture that's occurring is now on my other monitor. So I'm going to have to pivot this way, which whatever, that's fine. We'll deal with it. Okay, so under MISP, I will go into administration, select my list off keys, and let's go ahead and create an authentication key for Cortex. Let's call it Cortex, and I'm going to just say any IP because I'm lazy, and I will say read only. So I'll go ahead and submit that and copy this, and I'll put this in a notepad. All right, and I will jump back into Cortex, and let's configure our MISP Cortex analyzer. So if I go into organization here, you'll see we have analyzers config, analyzers, and responders config. I'm going to go ahead and select the analyzers config, and I will search for MISP. And now we will input our configuration settings for MISP. So name a MISP server. This could be whatever you want. I'll just call it MISP. The URL, go ahead and point to my URL MISP. And now I'll go ahead and paste my API key. The certificate check, I'll just set to false because I'm just using a self-signed cert for that, and I don't feel like configuring that. So I'll go ahead and save that. And now we have configured MISP. So if I now go into analyzers, let's go ahead and enable our MISP analyzer. So I'll go ahead and select enable. And this should automatically pre-populate with the details that we just set within the MISP configuration. So you'll see all these details here. So that looks good. And I'll go ahead and select save. All right, now let's actually run this analyzer. So if I go ahead and select new analysis, I'll go ahead and select IP. Let's just test against an IP address. Let me actually grab an IP address real quick that I know should give us a hit. Let's see if there's any within here. Yep, here we go. All right, let me go ahead and copy just this guy. Paste that in there. You'll see that we have our analyzer, our MISP analyzer here for selection. So if you don't see this here, then you may have skipped over a step of actually enabling the analyzer. So you will need to do that first before you'll have that selection there. And we'll go ahead and select start. And now this should have kicked it off in the background here and is now invoking our MISP API to look up this specific IP address. And here we get a response back. And here we see our job has completed as a success. So what has happened is that Cortex has taken that 212 dot whatever that IP address was and has made a call, API call to MISP and said, hey, do you have any events with this IP address? MISP went ahead and responded to our API request and said, yes, I do have one event with that API. I do have one event with that IP address, which is our 212.83.157.118. And here are all the details here. So we see some related events that it's giving to us. And this is just a JSON block back to us. In the next video, I will show you guys how we can kind of clean this up and bring it in within a Iris report module, which will be a little more user-friendly on the eyes rather than having to read this JSON block that we got back. And if we look at the ID, so the event ID was correlated with a 16, which we also see that within MISP, which is just this random feed that we grabbed this from. So that's all looking good. And now just to kind of give a better example of what I mean about like analyzing IoCs at scale. So let's go ahead and configure our VirusTotal analyzer as well. So if I go into analyzers config and I just type in VirusTotal, I think it exists here. Yep. So I'll go ahead and edit VirusTotal. And with this one, we just need to present it the API key. I'll go ahead and falsify those because I don't feel like downloading anything. And I'll go ahead and paste in my API key. Go ahead and save that. And now we need to enable our VirusTotal analyzer. So we'll go into the analyzers tab, select VirusTotal, and there are a few of them here. I'm just going to do the get report one I like. Again, it's pre-populated with the API key that we just provided. So that all looks good. And I'll go ahead and save this off. And now let's go ahead and run for our same IP address. Let's go ahead and run an analyzer for that. But now, rather than just selecting the MISP one, now I can select both. So instead of, as a SOC analyst, having to manually look at MISP, then manually look at VirusTotal, now I can enable all of these analyzers that I want, and I can run all of these analyzers with just a few clicks. And in the future videos, again, we will automate this process, but we can now interact with multiple like threat intel services with just a few clicks and all at once rather than having to do it one at a time. So if we go ahead and kick this guy off, we see that a report is generating for VirusTotal and then another is for MISP. Disclosure, the 212 one didn't run that I was just doing as an example because the MISP one had already run for the same IP address. So that's why you didn't see them both created at the same time. So I changed the IP address and now they were both created at the same time. So we see our MISP one has run with a success. And we get our report back and that's looking good. And then we can also look at VirusTotal has come back and VirusTotal also has some results with it. So we see one hit for malicious, one is harmless, and then we get some more meta details all down here. Which again, we will clean up this JSON in the next video so that we have kind of more prettier reports to look at. So that's going to wrap it up for today's video. Real quickly though, actually so as you can see, looking at the analyzers, there are currently 217 analyzers available. And these are all analyzers that are within the Hive's repo. The Hive are the people behind the Cortex project as well. And then there are 28 responders. But again, you do have the ability to write your own to fit whatever use case you may have, which is very, very powerful as well. I highly recommend you guys checking out Cortex, integrating it with your current SIEM stack because it makes SOC analyst job a hell of a lot easier. And it allows them to be able to identify malicious activity much faster. And I highly, highly recommend Cortex because all of these analyzers come out of the box. And in the next video, we will go ahead and integrate Cortex with DFIR Iris to bring the ability to run Cortex analyzers to our case management solution. So I appreciate you guys hanging out with me and I will see you in the next one.